Interesting question.
As far as relevance, I always, when I write something, I assume no readership. And I'm quite often right about that.
It's good to be right. But I mean, on the question of Iranian media presence in the United States, I don't know a lot about it. It sounds like you're right. Certainly, the Iranian diplomats are not permitted out of 25 miles beyond the UN. I mean, it's part of a sort of blanket ban, clearly, that doesn't strike me as very helpful. You guys want to address it anyway?
My understanding is that it's also, and maybe others can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's also impossible, if not very, very difficult for Iranian scholars to publish in American academic journals in other kinds of settings that might not necessarily having the same kind of weight as the media, I mean, is significant of how deep this runs and how difficult it is.
And does either of you want to address the question of whether the intelligentsia has any impact on American policy?
I'm barely a member of the academia, let alone the intelligentsia.
Right. And if you were a member of it?
Yeah. No, I would vote not relevant, but or at least not listened to. So.
Right. Sir. Professor Blair.
Dick Bullitt again from Columbia University. I think that the consensus of all the academics here would be that the academic community that knows something about the Middle East has zero influence on the policy. But what distresses me is that this is a joke and that everyone laughs as if it cannot possibly be otherwise. And one of the questions that I have in my mind is, has the academic community actually comported itself in such a manner, or even considered organizing itself in such a manner as to seek to have an influence? I mean, it's one thing to write an article and hope that you have an audience, but if you look at the way intellectual communities behave in other countries, they don't always take it as a foreordained conclusion that they are of no significance. And there's a reason the question is interesting, because it bespeaks the notion that perhaps an intelligentsia, an informed intelligentsia, should have some sort of audience, some sort of influence. And I think that there has been, I mean, 50 years ago we established Middle East studies in order to have expertise. Now, 50 years later, the Middle East is our greatest crisis, and our expertise is considered to be useless. Now, I think that should be a problem rather than a joke.
Of course. I mean, it is clear that the administration does consult with scholars. It just doesn't necessarily consult people in this room. Although it has consulted with Professor Ajami, it has consulted with Professor Lewis, it has consulted with serious people who have knowledge. And so it's not that there's no link between the academic intellectual communities and the administration. It's just that many people who are in the academy tend to see things somewhat differently, I think. Please. You just wait for the mic.
My name is John Bradamus. As a member of Congress, exactly 40 years ago, I wrote the International Education Act of 1966, the purpose of which was to provide federal funds to colleges and universities for the study of other countries' cultures and languages. President Johnson signed the bill into law. Congress never appropriated a penny to implement it. And I believe that among the reasons the United States has got into so much trouble in Vietnam, Iraq, Iran, is ignorance of the histories, countries, cultures, languages other than our own. In February of this year, the Committee for Economic Development issued a report calling for greater investment in international education and foreign language studies. The CED is composed of a couple of hundred corporate CEOs and a handful of university leaders, of whom I was one. We are pushing at New York University now, where I am now, for the establishment of a center for dialogue with the Islamic world. I remember speaking some years ago to a group of UN ambassadors from Islamic countries and telling them that unless they wanted the American people to think that Osama bin Laden symbolized Islam, they'd better get busy teaching about the constructive part of their tradition, and the rest of us had the responsibility to listen. I've made that comment, but I would be interested to know to what extent do the members of the panel see efforts being made in the American academic community to encourage the study of the Islamic world, and in particular of Islam.
Well, you looked at me, so I'll take it on. There certainly has been an explosion since I left university campus 3 years ago in students and faculty members who are interested in the Islamic world, interested in studying Arabic, interested in studying Persian. So I think that we are well on our way. The question is how to make that sustainable and continue. There was a boomlet of this kind of interest after the first Gulf War. The question is now how that can be sustained so we can develop this expertise.
Other questions?
Pete Mansour, Council on Foreign Relations. This comment and a question mark at the end will be addressed to Ray. And I'd like to make the counter case that Shia power, especially Iranian Shia power, is going to be stabilizing to the Middle East. The counter argument is that the major political party in Iraq, Skiri, has very close ties to Iran. Currently, the Iranian government is providing improvised explosive device technology to Shia groups within Iraq, which is directly responsible for the death of American soldiers there. They have very close ties to the Syrian regime. And should a Iraqi government emerge which has very close ties to Tehran, Tehran would have effective control over a good chunk of the world's oil supply, with ambitions to gain a nuclear status with its ongoing nuclear program. And that is somehow, because it's stabilizing for that portion of the world, good for the United States? Question mark.
Is the Iranian nuclear bomb, a lot of people view it as a threat. I tend to view it as an opportunity for personal purposes. Is Skiri and others, what can you attribute to the electoral success of Supreme Council for Islamic Revolution, Dawa, and so on? Why have they been successful? Why has Skiri essentially managed to become triumphant in Baghdad? I think part of that is their organizational capability. Part of that is the establishment of their own identity. And if you look at what the leadership of the Iraqi political parties, Shia political parties, are saying, they're saying very clearly that we have no intention of emulating the Iranian theocratic model here. And we have our own identity, we have our own interest, and we recognize that we have to exist in an Iraqi political context, in an Iraqi national political context. So we're part of Iraq, despite the fact that we might have been in Iran for periods of exile, and Dawa was also in Syria and Lebanon and elsewhere. And they had no choice under the repressive regime of Saddam Hussein. So I don't think necessarily that could be held against them. But also, as Iraqi political society matures, I think you begin to see the Shia organizations put greater distance between themselves and Iran, specifically to address that particular question, namely your empowerment yields or national subordinations to Iran. So I think that's actually going to change, and I think it has continued to change. On Iran's nuclear program per se, I think no matter what happens in terms of American or international community's response, we are going to have to adjust to living in the Middle East where there's a second power with a mature nuclear capability. Not necessarily weapons, but a mature nuclear capability with an advanced nuclear infrastructure. And that may essentially guide how the United States and other actors, regional and national community, reacts to the changing strategic alignments of the Middle East, because I think that's just where it's going to go, no matter what options are contemplated. Perhaps with a greater degree of diplomatic, political changes between the United States and Iran, you can have imposing certain degree of restraint on Iran's nuclear program. And at this point, what the negotiations that are taking place are not for Iran to dismantle the nuclear edifice, but to restrain and regulate it. And I think that's just where it's going to go.
Okay, well, I think we're seeing the hook. It's beyond a quarter of. So I want to say thanks, Steve and Toby and Ray. And lunch is in 15 minutes.
It's getting sick.
He was good.